him up, no Brig health pack to sustain him through here. So I love that Rio's actually punishing King Genius now, and Epps once again finds that kill onto McCree, but Tyranator gonna fall. Chicken finds Tomb, equalizing this, putting us in the favor of double cap. King Genius not wasting any time, gets straight into the nitty gritty, has a primal rage here, so if you're milky, you're gonna be on your toes. Chicken finds 3, what a machine.
Despite everything that some advanced teams went through over the course of Season 1, absolutely nothing holds a candle to the levels of drama that plagued Double Cap, later known as Double Clap. Every week it seemed like a roll of the dice, if anything, would hold the team back. And what would it be? Mentally boomed or motivated into overdrive? The only thing that you could be sure of for any given week is the uncertainty of which team would show up.
After the manager applications, at the time Double Cap was led by the relative newcomers Roxiza as manager and Zach as his captain. Being the only manager out of 12 that wasn't familiar with the league coming into Season 1, DC was at an obvious disadvantage of knowing who's who. To make up for that fact, the team held more pugs in a short period prior to the draft than any other team in the entire league. Every single day, dozens if not hundreds of players would flock to Double Cap's public server to play against one another and prove themselves to the team's scouts. From this, a select group of approximately 12 players were chosen to participate in private pugs as a way to more closely scout out the prospects. All fine and dandy up to this point, right? Well, this is where the juice comes in. Unbeknownst to the league staff at the time, Roxiza was reaching out to these private pug players through group chats and encouraging them to either not show up to other teams' pugs or blatantly throw them in order to make themselves appear less appealing. This obviously is against the rules for a manager to encourage such behavior. Players can decide themselves that they'd prefer to be drafted by a specific team, but managers are held to a higher standard and aren't allowed to take part in such interactions. The problem with this scheming was that staff had no way of knowing the shadiness that was transpiring. It required someone on the inside to speak up about it, which is thankfully exactly what happened. Bob Ross was the first to reach out to staff, and Zach shortly thereafter. It was thanks to them that the scandal was busted wide open, and after some deliberation, it was decided that Zach would take over Double Cap as manager, with Bob as the captain. With that, they would spend the remaining days prior to the draft continuing to scout out the best players for the new and redeemed Double Cap. As it turns out, scouting extensively pays off, as the raw level of talent present looking at DC's draft picks is borderline insane. Just to name a few, there was King Genius, McCree, Oace, and Kizgo. To be honest, we could easily just name off all 12 of their draft picks because the team was shaping up to be the league's San Francisco Shock with the disgusting amount of riches they stole from the draft pool.
It's undeniable that Double Cap had the talent necessary to pit themselves against the best novice division had to offer. The question remained whether they could bring that skill together in a manner cohesive enough to pull out the win. And sure enough, DC came out of the gates firing during their Week 1 match against One Trick Wonders. These two teams were predicted to be among the top in their division, meaning that the league was witnessing a battle of the titans right from the start. Double Cap took an early 2-0 lead with their superior GOATS play, and the game appeared to be locked up in their favor. However, something got into OTW, and they came back with a vengeance. It became apparent that DC didn't practice against DPS compositions enough and simply crumbled underneath the off-meta strategies that their opponents were running. Their big debut to the league would be in one of the worst ways possible, losing by a reverse sweep. This, of course, took its toll on the team's morale. However, most of the players agree that at this time, they were still optimistic about how well they performed, given how highly rated One Trick was rated by everyone. If they could go toe-to-toe with the supposed best of them, then they would only have a little further to go before they too were a top contender. That's the tagline the team stuck to moving into their second match against Bot Burgers, and it certainly paid off as they rebound with a clean sweep. They continued on into Week 3, rather confident that they were one of the best teams, and defeating the up-and-coming Rio Redemption would help them prove that to the rest of the league. They practiced, scouted, and prepared for what they expected Rio to run, and it worked like a charm. Despite putting up a good fight, Rio eventually fell to Double Cap 3-1, and DC had begun to grow ever more confident in their starting lineup. Unfortunately, at this time, there was also inner turmoil beginning to fester from within, specifically from those players stuck riding the bench, despite the fact that they were supremely confident that they could start on any other team in Novice. Requests for trades began to appear, and the coaches, specifically the head coach at the time, Quacks, weren't quite sure how to handle it.
The original plan had been to sub people in and out, similar to how Seoul Dynasty did during Season 1 of Overwatch League, but this obviously didn't work, so the plan had to be changed. The problems began to arise, however, when Quacks didn't communicate this to anyone else, and became supremely confrontational when approached by the team. His toxicity soon began to spiral out of control, and as the teams themselves describe it, Quacks knew he was on his way out, and decided to sabotage the team as much as possible during that time. That's why he traded Kizgo for Pichu, as well as Apple Expert and Chicken to Rio. During this time, Bob Ross had also stepped down as captain and was eventually picked up by Platchat, leaving King Genius to fill the void for the team's management. Apple and Chicken were practically perma-bench at this point, but Kizgo was starting off tank at the time, causing Rydcoast to step in and fill in those shoes while they introduced Pichu to the new team environment. This, combined with a series of unfortunate events, led Double Cap to be wholly unprepared and understaffed for Week 4 games against Platchat. A disconnect by Oasis mid-map led Platchat to be gaining the upper hand, and DC was never truly able to recover, having lost one of their star players, as well as having multiple people on off roles at this point in the match. Despite their slow rise up in the seasonal rankings, Double Cap had just given Platchat their first and only win of the regular season. That's undoubtedly something they wish they could forget. Quacks was obviously long gone by this point, and assistant coach Toasty took up the mantle as head coach. The team refocused and prepared hard for the final game before mid-season break. This was by far the biggest game for Double Cap thus far. They were going up against the only team to remain undefeated in the entire league, Papega Friends. They were undeniably the best team in Novice, no one could stand up to them, and you can imagine what it meant to DC at the thought of taking Papega down. The match that ensued was a 5-map thriller that went all the way down to the wire, ending in a miraculous victory for Double Cap. Through all their internal struggles up to this point, and despite losing to the worst team the week prior, they pulled out the upset of a lifetime and defeated the undefeatable. DC claimed their rightful place in the second seed of leaderboards and gazed up at first with confidence that it would soon be theirs.
The mid-season break was rather uneventful for the most part. The team attempted to scrim in preparation for the rematch against OTW in a few weeks, but no one seemed to be taking the practice all too seriously. In the meantime, Zach had become rather inactive due to a menagerie of personal issues, including but not limited to working overtime constantly and going through surgery. Eventually, he came to the realization that he could no longer lead the team properly and stepped down as manager. Toasty was willing to step up to the plate until a more permanent manager was found. However, as we'll see as we progress through the second half of the season, that this never happened. The team was now put in an awkward situation where the one leading the charge wasn't fully willing to be where they stand. As you might imagine, the lack of practice caught up to the team, and they failed to get their revenge on OTW for the reverse sweep back in Week 1. What made things worse is that tensions were once again rising within the team, this time surrounding specifically Oasis and Charm. Neither player was happy in the position they were in, and they tended to disagree with how Toasty ran things. This ultimately led both players being traded away to Platchat, though that didn't solve the rift forming between Toasty and his coaching staff, and the rest of the players on the roster. However, it wasn't all bad at this point. Bob Ross and Kizgo were reobtained in the trade with Platchat, as well as DC Nabbing Designs. Somewhat revitalized with some new and old blood joining the ranks, the rebranded Double Clap was ready to take on the remainder of the season. They would not, however, be able to replicate their success from the first half of the season. While they would get their revenge on Platchat from Week 4's upset, DC would fail to gain any ground against the rest of their opponents throughout weeks 6 through 10. The quarterfinals were upon Double Clap, and it was time to face against their age-old rivals in One Trick Wonders, the only team they had never been able to defeat, and with tensions within the team reaching a tipping point, everyone was expecting a repeat of weeks 1 and 6. The cause for this final bout of drama for the season was mainly a fight of morality between Toasty and King Genius. King was described by many of his teammates for being overly passionate at times, which could very easily come off as aggressive to those without the thickest of skins. In order to try and quell his outbursts, Toasty had King benched and stripped him of his captain's title, instead giving it to McCree. King's main argument against Toasty and the coaching staff was that they were needlessly subbing in players in order to appease everyone instead of focusing on the lineup that would give them the best chance of winning. Of course, neither King nor Toasty were great at communicating with each other, so their discussions, if you want to call them that, didn't get very far. With mere days until the playoffs started, King was still benched, half the starting lineup was threatening to sit out their game if their leader wasn't playing, and just about everyone one was expecting OTW to steal this match, easy peasy.
But just when Double Clap were at their darkest, they managed to come to an agreement for the good of the team and allow King to play. In the end, they realized that everyone wanted to beat One Trick more than anything, and the best way to do that was to stick with a core roster. Tenuous as it may be, DC was surprisingly ready to take on the quarterfinals and come out with the victory they've been waiting all season for. Sure enough, call the lack of preparation on One Trick's part or an inhuman amount of determination on Double Claps, they came out on top for the first time in this matchup's history. DC has finally defeated every team in Novice at least once and proved to everyone, including themselves, that they were more than the drama that divided them. I like to think of Double Clap at this point in the season as that SpongeBob meme of Plankton after he finally defeats Mr. Krabs. They were so caught up in the thrill of seizing the one victory that eluded them for so long that they were completely unprepared for what came next. Double Clap did good getting as far as they did, but it felt more like a foregone conclusion that Papega Parrots would clean sweep them and advance to the grand finals.
Man, this took a stupid amount of time to write this script. I haven't finished with all of the teams at the time of writing this, but my guess is Double Clap will end up being the longest of the bunch. So very much happened in the short period of time, and it genuinely sounds like they never stopped moving, for better or worse. Their recollections are all over the place, and the amount of feuding that went on internally is just insane looking back at it. How in the world they managed to perform as well as they did, I don't think I'll ever know. But I guess that just speaks to the level of talent these players have. It kind of makes me interested to see where they'll all end up in future seasons, if I'm being honest. But getting back to the Season 1 Double Clap, the only thing I can say about them is that I have no idea what to think. One week they give Platchat their first win because not enough people could show up, and the next week they have all hands on deck to take down the then undefeated Papega Friends. If they could have kept even a fraction of that cohesion and momentum they had during week 5, they easily could have remained a top 2 team for the rest of the season. Instead, they played themselves harder than their opponents ever could, and let their emotions get the best of them. I shudder to think what could have been if they ever could have gotten a manager that was stern enough to keep everyone in line and cooperating. Could have been a scary sight for the rest of Novice, that's for sure. Instead, what we got was one of the most spectacularly explosive train wrecks we have ever seen since Season 0's Easy Clap. And in the end, I guess we can appreciate the entertainment factor if nothing else. See.